Hello there. Welcome in to a Thursday edition of the show. I am so glad to have you, whether you're listening on your radio, streaming the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the free Extra Sports 1300 app sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health, and well-being for all. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics await you, and I would love to get your thoughts. You could call or text into the show at 719-247-1313, or you could send me a tweet at Gingerly Tweets on X. Now, I think that we have found the hockey version of James Harden. I realized this last night. It was right there in front of my face. So, probably took me a little bit longer than it should have to get to this point. Connor Hellebuyck, over the last 5 years, there are 12 goalies in the NHL who have played 150 regular season games and at least 15 playoff games, which is the completely arbitrary sample size that I have chosen because there were enough goaltenders in there without being too inclusive. 4 of those 12 see their goals allowed average go up from the regular season to the playoffs. Not ideal. 4 of those 12 goalies, doesn't necessarily have to be the same 4, but 4 of those 12 goalies see their save percentage from the regular season to the playoffs go down. Also not ideal. There are 2 goalies that reside in both of those groups. They are Stuart Skinner and Connor Hellebuyck. Now, I don't have to tell you the difference between these 2 goalies, but I will. Stuart Skinner has never been mistaken for one of the best goalies in the league. Connor Hellebuyck has 2 Vezina trophies sitting on his mantle. And Connor Hellebuyck sees his goals allowed average jump up almost an entire goal per game from the regular season to the playoffs, while seeing his save percentage go down. Even if you factor in his first playoff appearance, which went better than his last 5, only Ilya Samsonov, yes, that Ilya Samsonov, has a worse goals allowed average of that group than Connor Hellebuyck. You take just the last 5 years, Hellebuyck has the worst. There is no goalie in this league who is more brilliant during the regular season and worse in the postseason than the guy that the Colorado Avalanche faced last night. And the Avalanche have seen the duality of Connor Hellebuyck up close and personal quite a bit over the last calendar year. They have seen him at his worst in the playoffs last year, and this year they have seen him arguably at his best. The Colorado Avalanche this year have spent over 3.5 hours on the ice this season trying to figure out how to score a goal on Connor Hellebuyck. And they finally did twice last night. The drought is over. They have figured out how to beat Connor Hellebuyck. And it's not totally surprising how they figured it out. One was Nathan MacKinnon essentially passing it to himself. Took one shot, went right back to him, took another shot and scored. To me, that was the perfect way for the Avalanche to end that drought. And then the other one was Cale Makar. your best players beating arguably the best goaltender in the league feels like a good plan. And the Avalanche were able to do that last night. But they didn't win the game. All that work, 3.5 hours, more than 3.5 hours, spent trying to figure out Connor Hellebuyck. They finally solved the regular season version of him, only to see themselves lose just 17 seconds into overtime, thanks to Neil Pionk. Now, this isn't about Connor Hellebuyck, because there is a good chance that if the Colorado Avalanche were to meet the Winnipeg Jets at some point in the playoffs, they would see the playoff version of Connor Hellebuyck. But this is about a bigger picture here. The Avalanche are now 4-8 this season against teams that are currently with them in the Western Conference playoffs. Of the teams that are in the playoffs right now, the Avs are 4-8 against them. 4-7-1, but we'll just say 4-8. The Avalanche have played like a contender, like a Stanley Cup contender. They have looked the part over the last month and a half. But this stretch of games represented how they measure up to other teams like them. Are they good enough to actually win it all? That's the next question. Now that they figured out the goaltending, now that we're into January, is this team really good enough to win a Stanley Cup? And I've harped on Casey Middlestat as being the X factor for this Avalanche team. And by the way, the 3-point game he had against Dallas is the only one of his last 7 games in which he has registered a point. And Jared Bednar is trying every which way to get him going. So I'm not going to turn around and say Casey Middlestat is not an X factor for this team. He absolutely is. However, a lot of my Casey Middlestat takes were based around the premise that at some point they would have Valeri Nichushkin back in the lineup. I'm a little less sure about when we're going to see that. And more importantly, Jared Bednar is a little less certain when he will get Valeri Nichushkin back in the lineup, saying yesterday at morning skate that Nichushkin has suffered a setback in his recovery from the lower body injury. They have now made him week to week, and listening to Jared Bednar, it really doesn't sound like you can expect Valeri Nichushkin back on the ice anytime soon. Without Valeri Nichushkin, and this stretch of games, they have played without him. These measuring stick type games against other playoff teams, they have played without him. And you are seeing the way that they look. Watching the Avalanche without Valeri Nichushkin, not just in this little stretch, but at the beginning, right? Let's not forget about the beginning of the season when they didn't have him. Watching the Avalanche without Valeri Nichushkin makes you understand even more why the Avalanche really were not hesitant in welcoming Valeri Nichushkin back from his suspension. And getting rid of him, if that was going to be the be-all, if that was going to be the end game of all of this, with Valeri Nichushkin missing the end of the last 2 playoff runs, it was always going to mean that the Avs weren't going to win a Stanley Cup. Now, I don't want to get back into the bigger picture of the greater good and all of that kind of stuff. But as far as their viability as a Stanley Cup champion, it was going to make them less so if they outright got rid of Valerian Nichushkin. That's just the fact of the matter. And you're seeing it. You're seeing it against these other playoff teams that they just are missing something. And you think about the type of impact that having Valerian Nichushkin back can have on a Casey Mittelstadt. Potentially. The Avalanche have certainly been ravaged by injury. But we have to be fair here that some injuries just don't matter as much as others. With all due respect to Miles Wood, if the Avalanche or if the injury to Miles Wood is what keeps the Avalanche from winning a Stanley Cup, I would argue they were not good enough in the first place, because Miles Wood is not that level of difference maker. So certainly you can hem and haw a little bit about guys like Miles Wood missing time, or a Sam Girard or something like that. But ultimately there are levels to this, and Valerian Nichushkin is at a level where you say without him, that's a big problem. That is a problem that perhaps the Avalanche cannot overcome. Because what are you going to do to replace him? You can't realistically make a move given that you're still waiting to sign Mikko Rantanen. Like, who are you going to bring in to replace what you have in Valerian Nichushkin? The Avs, if they feel like, we need a little bit more depth on the third and fourth line, maybe we need a sixth defenseman, I think the Avs can go out and get that. And I think they will, especially on the blue line. But not having Valerian Nichushkin changes the calculus, and you've seen it the last 2 years, right? With him being gone for reasons that are not injury related, has synced up with the demise of the Colorado Avalanche in the postseason. Now, there's 3 months left in the season. This is not a hit the panic button plea here. There's still time. Even if he's a long ways off, would 2 months be a long time? Yeah, I think it would be a long time. And he'd still have a whole month before the regular season is over. So there's still time to get Valerian Nichushkin back. But what has become abundantly clear, as much as the Avs, even at times without Valerian Nichushkin, have looked really good against the teams that they'll have to go through to get to the Stanley Cup final, the returns haven't been nearly as good. They're 1-3 now against Winnipeg. They are 0-2 against Edmonton. Their best win of late has been against a Dallas team that did not have Jake Ottinger, who, by the way, going back to the Connor Hellebuck thing, is a guy who improves from the regular season to the postseason. They beat Casey DeSmith the other day. It's a different Stars team. This stretch of games was going to be about how do the Avs measure up with what we think are their peers. And quite frankly, they are not really measuring up that well, and missing Valerian Nichushkin is a big reason why. Take your thoughts, 719-247-1313. Just getting going with this Thursday edition of Drive Time Sports. Coming up next, I think given the NFL news cycle outside of counting down to the championship round on Sunday, what's going on across the rest of the NFL has brought something right to the forefront about the state of affairs when it comes to NFL owners. I'll explain next on Extra Sports 1300. Welcome back, Drive Time Sports. Want to clarify something from the previous segment because Brett asks a very earnest, honest, and in no way trying to needle me type question. Says, I'm a calculus teacher. What about calculus? Does this all change? Just wondering what your opinion is on calculus. Can Patrick Mahomes do calculus? He went to Texas Tech, not the easiest college to get into. I do not want to disparage the fine institution that is Texas Tech, but calculus could be used to describe the subject in school, or it can be used as a decision-making method, especially one appropriate for a specialized realm, a calculation, estimation, or computation. So I use changing the calculus to describe how not having Valerian Nichushkin makes or should make people feel differently about the Avalanche's chances of winning a Stanley Cup. Boom. This is a serious program, Brett. We talk serious things here, like the incompetency in the NFL, which is what I would like to get to right now. The Jaguars, just 2 weeks after firing Doug Peterson and swearing Trent Baalke did not deserve to join him, they fired him anyway. As they weren't able to even get, I don't think Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn even picked up the phone to interview with the Jags. And now Liam Cohen, who you probably don't know, I every once in a while have to reintroduce myself to Liam Cohen. I forget sometimes who he is. He's the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't say that to disparage him, but let's be real here. If Liam Cohen is looking at the Jags job, talking to the Jags, and then he goes back to the Bucs and says, I would like to remain your offensive coordinator, please. That says something about the state of affairs in Jacksonville. Would you agree? So then Shad Khan, in his glorious mustache, fired Trent Baalke, the general manager that every moderately smart football person said is the problem. Remember, that's why Jim Harbaugh doesn't coach the 49ers anymore. Maybe not the whole reason, but he and Baalke had their run-ins. Everyone was saying it for weeks. Shad Khan was like, nope, not Trent Baalke. And now that all of these head coaching candidates are like, no, thank you. Now he's firing Baalke, which makes him look even worse. And if you remember, this comes on the heels of a hiring and firing cycle in which Mark Davis and apparently his Geppetto, Tom Brady, decided, yeah, we are going to fire our general manager after all. And they ended up hiring Tampa Bay's assistant GM, Spytek. But it did not make the Raiders look very good when they let go Antonio Pierce, and then they were retaining Tom Telesco, and then they decided they didn't want to retain Tom Telesco anymore. And then, of course, perhaps the example that takes the cake of what I'm about to discuss is now Jerry Jones spending 5 hours whining and dining Brian Schottenheimer to be his next head coach, while everyone says, why didn't you just keep McCarthy? And the only other idea that we think has come out of Dallas has been to hire Deion Sanders, which would be an objectively terrible idea for both the Dallas Cowboys and Deion Sanders. But they're rolling out the red carpet, doing the full court press on Brian Schottenheimer, who I don't believe anyone has ever desired to be the head coach of their football team. I hear him come up in interviews a lot, never see him get a job. And he's going to take over one of the most storied franchises in the NFL, a team that supposedly has Super Bowl aspirations. To say nothing of the fact that he was basically Mike McCarthy's top lieutenant in many ways, a regime that you were unhappy with. The NFL, more than any other league in these United States of America, has a competency gap. No league has more bad franchises. And I mapped them out. This is how I spent the time after Neil Pionk's overtime goal. This is how I spent my evening, writing it out. Now, the difficulty is to separate teams that lose with bad franchises, right? I think there is room to be a decent franchise and not do a lot of winning lately. And the NBA is a great example of this, right? Because Oklahoma City, even though they kept losing, had a plan. They kept hoarding all of these draft picks, right? There was a clear plan here, and now you're looking at Oklahoma City and saying they're one of the smartest organizations in basketball. I would submit to you that they never were dumb. They always knew what they were doing. So I think you can lose and not be a bad franchise. There are more bad franchises in the NFL right now than good ones. And I'm not, and two that would be examples that maybe people would want to move into the good column are Washington and Denver. Certainly there are signs, but let's not let one season completely remake what they have been recently. Okay, this is a rolling average here that I'm taking. And the Broncos have not been a good franchise for a while. And the Commanders for even longer than that, right? So, yes, they're both pointed in the right direction. And there's certainly reason to believe that here in a couple, 2-3 years down the road, they might be considered a good franchise. But one season, even though it's different people in the building, in some ways, the sins of the previous regime are visited upon the current one. But even if you omit those two and you say, yeah, they weren't great, but now they look like they've got it right, even if you take them out, or even if you move them to the good column, I still think there are more bad franchises in the NFL than good ones. And you see, it's becoming more and more prevalent that you have years like we're having, right? Where organizations just look foolish with their change of direction, with their seemingly lack of a plan of how to improve. To say nothing of some, scandals and other things that have happened with NFL teams in recent years. Across the league, at least 5 head coaches have been fired in every cycle since 2015, which is significantly up from where it used to be. NFL teams were much more patient, or you could say perhaps NFL franchises were much more competent 20 years ago in some ways. But we're seeing this spike in head coach firings, and there are so many repeat offenders on this list. Jacksonville, Denver, repeat offender in this regard. Washington. But they are the one league where I think if you put the good organizations in one column and the bad organizations in another, the bad list would be longer. And I think I know the reason. Ownership. These are the richest group of owners in any league, right? A lot of them have had to pay an exorbitant amount of money to be part of the league, right? The cheapest franchise won't go for less than $2 billion. Okay, so that's value, yes, but these teams are making money. The revenue, look at the revenue generated by the NFL. I'm not saying every one of these guys is among the wealthiest people in the world, but there are enough of them. And on the whole, they are a richer group of owners than you see in other sports. Paying that kind of money or having that kind of money leads, I think, a lot of these owners to a sense of entitlement. And that entitlement leads more than anything else to meddling. This is my team, I paid handsomely, or this is my team and it's worth this much. The inflated ego that comes along with that, I want to be a part of the decision-making process. It also leads to nepotism. How many NFL teams were either handed down from a father to a daughter or a father to a son, only to see that franchise be in worse shape moving forward than it was previously? How many of these NFL teams are, what do I want to say? Like the hiring issues that have popped up in the NFL, right? There is, I don't want to go so far as to call it race related. I think I can at least say at minimum, this is, hey, I like this guy, or hey, I know this guy, or whatever. The NFL suffers from that kind of mentality more than any other league. There are more family members, more friends, more, former players that are associated with these organizations, not because of their acumen necessarily, but just because of their relationship with the owner. And what makes it worse, what exacerbates it, in my opinion, is that the really good franchises in the NFL are about the best franchises you will find in any sport. Right? Think about Baltimore. Think about Green Bay. Think about San Francisco. Steelers, yeah, we could talk about where they are right now, but the Steelers have long been one of the best organizations in all of sport. So you could put those kind of franchises against any in Major League Baseball, the NHL, and the NBA and say that they're better. Just like you could take the worst franchises in the NFL, the Raiders, the Jags, the Browns, and put them against the worst in any other league, and they would probably outrank them. So the gap is as wide as there is, but there's also more bad organizations than good ones. And think about it. You know more NFL owners than you know in any other sport. Right? Jerry Jones, Mark Davis, Sean Kahn, Woody Johnson, David Tepper throwing drinks on people. Even the good ones, even the ones that have success, like a Clark Hunt. He's out there all the time. And not just on the podium accepting the Lombardi trophy. He's on the sideline. They show him in the like, these owners love all of them, good, bad, or indifferent. They all love the spotlight. Some just let that carry over into the football operation, and some just leave it at, I like to be shown on television. The best owners are the ones who write a check, give it to very smart people, and get out of the way. Now, the Cronkies, who own most of the teams that we talk about on a daily basis, are not the free spenders, let's say, that Greg Penner has shown to be. But what have they learned to do? Hire smart people, empower them, get out of their way. We see far less of the Cronkies these days than we saw in the early days when they took over. Remember how much we saw Josh Kroenke? You hardly see him now. The Avs are a smart organization. The Nuggets are a smart organization. The Rams are a smart organization. Why? Because the Cronkies found smart people, stayed patient. They've been patient with their organizations. They haven't meddled. And I would say the Rams are one of the good ones in the NFL, but there's far more bad ones. And it's a wonder that Team X, name your team, why can't they ever figure out quarterback? Right? Think about where the Broncos have been when they were trying to find a quarterback. What their situation was in the front office. It was kind of a mess. They couldn't find a quarterback. Think about the Bears. Think about Cleveland. There's something to be said for these kind of misses being attributed to those at the top of the organization, don't you think? And it's also why you look at a Ben Johnson in Chicago or an Aaron Glenn in the Jets, and yes, they both on paper have made great hires. But in the back of your mind, you're going, I don't know who's going to work. It makes all the sense in the world why Aaron Glenn would coach the Jets, why Ben Johnson would coach the Bears. And they probably made the right decisions. If they were ready to become head coaches, they probably made the best decisions. Given that these are all losing franchises and they're all in a bit of disarray, which is the case most times when a team has a head coach opening. I think Ben Johnson has the chance to be a very good head coach. I think Aaron Glenn, same thing. I don't know if McCaskey or Woody Johnson are going to allow them to be. That's my hesitation with them. That's why I don't know fully that they're going to be successful. It has nothing to do with them and everything to do with those organizations who runs them. And in the NFL, it is a more prevalent problem than any other league. 719-247-1313. One of those organizations that feels a little bit all over the place of late is the Tennessee Titans. They have a new general manager who made some interesting statements regarding what Tennessee may do with the number one overall pick in the draft. And it has to do with a former of the Colorado Buffaloes. The big game is fast approaching, and it's time to place your pre-order for your big game party with Hooters. You can get 50 boneless wings for $79.99 or 50 bone-in wings for $89.99. And if you're like, I'm not much for entertaining this year, I just want to go someplace and watch the game, Hooters has you covered with that. On February 9th, you show up, watch the game there. You can have a chance to win a custom engraved Hooters Colorado Solo stove. Either way, make Hooters a part of your big game plans. Apparently, the word calculus can be used in a variety of ways. We have already covered the math one. We've covered the decision-making one. And now finding out on the text line from the 719, hey, Kaufman, calculus, also known as tartar, is hardened plaque that forms on the teeth when the plaque isn't removed properly. It's a common condition among dogs, cats, and Mahomes's. Rude. That's a great setup, though. Like, I got to tell you, because I read it, and I'm like, it's topical. It's on brand for what we've been discussing today. If you're just joining us, you are completely lost. We've been talking about how to use the word calculus properly. So you're right on brand, and then just right at the last minute, you slid in the dig on Patrick Mahomes. It's good. Well done. I mean it. Well done. I have good humor about these things. Just don't. If the Bills win on Sunday, don't text me that Monday. Or maybe if Mahomes plays poorly, I'll be like, yeah, remember when you said it was Mahomes? I agree. Anyway, speaking of the Chiefs, because everything, as you know, revolves around them, the new Tennessee Titans general manager used to be in Kansas City. That's not me bringing up. That's just facts. He spoke about what the Titans may do with the number one pick, and his comments are very interesting. He assured the media gathered, Titans fans alike, that they would not pass on a, quote, generational talent with the first pick overall. Now, I feel like the longer we get into the draft process, the fewer players that are looked at as generational talents, right? Because we start to pick them apart. We start to point out their flaws. So I feel like however many generational talents you think are available in this draft, you'll probably think there's a few less by the time April rolls around, because we're going to dissect these guys and pick them apart. But when it comes to this draft, I think the list is shorter than normal. Now, don't get me wrong. Good draft. Plenty of quality players, perhaps for the Denver Broncos to pick in the 20s. It's going to be a good draft, but generational talent. How many players can you actually say are generational talents in this draft? To me, it's one. It's one, and his name is Travis Hunter. That's it. I think Shedeur Sanders is has the chance, and that's something that we need to change when we talk about these draft picks. Don't say going to be. Because if Shedeur Sanders lands in a terrible place, he is not going to become a franchise quarterback. He has the talent required and has a chance to be a franchise quarterback, to be a top 10 quarterback in the league. I believe he has that ability. That's not generational. I like Shedeur Sanders as a prospect more than I like Cam Ward. It's a little taste. I think if you want somebody that gives you a chance like Bo Nix and like Jaden Daniels, not to put that pressure unfairly on Shedeur Sanders, but if you want a quarterback that is more ready to go right now, it's Shedeur. But if you get Cam Ward in a good place and are patient with him, I think the ceiling could be higher with Cam Ward. Neither are generational talents. The closest player to being a generational talent besides Travis Hunter is maybe Abdul Carter for Penn State. And I don't think he's a generational talent. I think he's really good. I don't think he's a generational talent. That's Travis. And if that's going to be the thought process of the Tennessee Titans, they have to go with Travis Hunter, number 1 overall. Because he's the only one right now that I think is a generational talent. And again, the longer we dissect these players and pick them apart and go over every little detail of their college football career, we usually don't like them as much. I don't think that Travis Hunter will dip below the generational talent line throughout this process. But we're certainly going to hear about the negatives about Travis Hunter moving forward. To me, this is two things. One, it is that the Tennessee Titans are not married to the idea of taking a quarterback because they want a generational talent and will not pass one up. But here's the other reason he's saying that. And it's tied to that. He's saying the Titans are open for business. You don't think generational talent is some sort of a signal, a dog whistle to other NFL general managers? Do they not see what you and I see, that Travis Hunter is perhaps the only generational talent in this draft? And the next closest guy would probably be Abdul Carter, also not a quarterback. Perhaps one could argue that Ashton Genty at his position is generational. I mean, we haven't seen numbers like his in a generation. So if you throw in Ashton Genty, again, not a quarterback. The quarterbacks in this draft are not generational talents. So if you are a team like the Giants, like the Browns, like the Raiders, that are in desperate need of a quarterback, the Tennessee Titans' new general manager is saying, we're open for business. Make us your best offer. Because we're not passing on a generational talent, which means we're not married to the idea of taking a quarterback. Coming up next, speaking of quarterbacks and ones that have been recently in the draft, the semifinalists or the finalists for all the major NFL awards have come out. It won't surprise you which Broncos have been nominated, but we'll discuss which one is more likely to win their respective award. That's coming up next here on Extra Sports 1300. Welcome in Drive Time Sports. You can watch the show live on our social media platforms, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, at XTRA Sports 1300. You can join the conversation on our text/phone line. It does both. 719-247-1313. The finalists for the big postseason awards in the NFL have been announced. We saw the other day that Jaden Daniels is the Pro Football Writers Association Rookie of the Year. And I do think that it certainly can be an indicator of where the AP is going to vote. But we recognize the AP. That's just how it goes. So the Pro Football Writers Association, or Pro Football Writers of America, whatever the A and PFWA stands for, is not what we wait for. It's not what we're talking about when we're debating Bo Nix, Sean Payton, and Pat Surtain. All three of them have been named as finalists for their respective awards. Bo Nix for Rookie of the Year, Sean Payton for Coach of the Year, and Pat Surtain for Defensive Player of the Year. In case you did not see the other finalists, the Rookie of the Year finalists are Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and Brock Bowers, along with Bo Nix. The Coach of the Year finalists are Dan Campbell, Kevin O'Connell, Dan Quinn, Andy Reid, and Sean Payton. And the Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson, TJ Watt, Zach Bond, and Pat Surtain. Seeing the names that are nominated, I still think that the Bronco with the best chance to take home his respective award is Patrick Surtain. If I were voting on these awards, Pat Surtain would be the only one that would get my vote. Not that it matters because, as Ricky Bobby said, if you ain't first, you're last. I think Sean Payton has more of a case to be made the Coach of the Year than Bo Nix is to be the Rookie of the Year. I think Bo Nix's success this year is a big argument for Sean Payton being Coach of the Year. And I think those two, you can't extricate Bo Nix from it, or you can't extricate Sean Payton from Bo Nix's success, but you can look at other things Sean Payton has done with the Denver Broncos, independent of Bo Nix, and make a case for him for Coach of the Year. But obviously his work with Bo Nix is a big reason why he's nominated. But Pat Surtain is the Defensive Player of the Year. The entire premise of the Denver Broncos defense is we're going to blitz a ton of dudes. We're going to send everybody. You guys got to hold up your end of the bargain on the back end. And despite how often the Denver Broncos blitz throughout this season, they didn't get torched. And I'm talking game 1 to game 17. There were certain isolated incidents, certainly, but we're talking about the entire year. And how many sacks that the Broncos got could you attribute to Patrick Surtain? Because that's going to be a big argument in all of this. The reason why they usually give it to a pass rusher is because sacks are the sexy number for them, and it's interceptions for corners. But the guys and you can even look at this year, a lot of the guys near the top of the list, you may be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that so-and-so was near the top of the league in interceptions. The best thing that you can do with an elite corner is not throw at him. So while the corners that are among the league leaders, and Pat Surtain's not that far away, but the ones at the very top, you could almost look at their ability to get interceptions and say, well, it's because it's credit to them for getting the interceptions, but also that shows that teams are willing to throw at them, that they are not worried despite them leading the league in interceptions, they're still throwing at them. It's very difficult to quantify the impact of Pat Surtain because he doesn't have those numbers that we go to, sacks, interceptions, pass breakups. You don't have them because they don't throw at him. And you look at everybody else on this list, and it kind of tells the story of Pat Surtain being clearly the best at what he does. Because he is. Remember when there was supposedly an argument on whether Pat Surtain or Sauce Gardner were better? We are way past that. That's aging like the Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid debate. Patrick Surtain is clearly the best corner in the league. And even if he doesn't win, the fact that he's the lone corner on this list is certainly a feather in his cap. But I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough recognition for what he did this year. He changed the course of the Broncos season with that pick six against the Raiders. He has locked down the best receivers that he has gone up against. The games that you look back on in the Broncos season and say, man, they really got torched in that game because they threw out somebody else. They targeted Riley Moss in Cincinnati. They targeted Levi Wallace against the Browns. The best games that wide receivers had against the Denver Broncos, Pat Surtain was not on those players. By the way, to the detriment of Vance Joseph, who I see many people are complaining that he's not up for assistant coach of the year. And I think there are games like the Ravens game, like the Browns game, like many of the games down the stretch where I would say, while Vance Joseph did a great job with the Broncos defense, I would not have him over Joe Brady, Vic Fangio, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, or Brian Flores. I wouldn't. It doesn't mean he wasn't good this year. But there are only so many names that you can include, and I would not put Vance Joseph on that list. It has to be a truly special season for a defensive back to be named Defensive Player of the Year. And we witnessed that season. Pat Surtain had that season. If you want to take it a step further and look at some of these other players, like, TJ Watt for years has been viewed as a player that wrecks games. I don't know that we saw that level of TJ Watt this year. Saw very good TJ Watt in his B game or B plus game, whatever you would grade it this year, is better than 90% of the league. But I didn't get the sense that TJ Watt was wrecking games the way he has in years past. Trey Hendrickson and Myles Garrett, credit to them, they were about the only guys that were doing their part on their respective teams' defenses. And Zach Bond, he's a revelation for the Eagles. This was like a practice squad dude. They're all great stories. They're all worth recognizing, but you want to talk about being head and shoulders above his peers. You want to talk about impact. To me, Pat Surtain blends those two better than any of the other nominees. I can't make a case for Bo Nix over Jaden Daniels. I can't. There isn't one. Sean Payton, I don't know if I could put him above Kevin O'Connell for what he did with Sam Darnold this year, who we came to find out is more Sam Darnold than whatever this quarterback was this year for the Minnesota Vikings. Sam Darnold turned into a pumpkin by the end of the year, which even the best coaches, they can only do it for so long, right? Sam Darnold was not necessarily going to be the plan. But with that division, with that quarterback, I think it's Kevin O'Connell. And you could certainly make the argument for Dan Quinn, but if the best thing about Washington this year was Jaden Daniels, then obviously you could vote for Jaden Daniels. But you think about how much Cliff Kingsbury had to do with that. If you're going down the list of who deserves the most credit for Washington's success, Dan Quinn might be third. Not a distant third. Praise is warranted, certainly, for what Dan Quinn has done. But I look at Daniels and Kingsbury and say, I think they had a little more to do with it. And Dan Quinn, and it's not surprising. Dan Quinn's a defensive coach. What did he do to help develop Jaden Daniels? That was Cliff Kingsbury's job. And it's that way with a lot of defensive head coaches. I think Pat Surtain should win. Probably put Sean Payton second to Kevin O'Connell, and I'd probably put Bo Nix I think second. I was thinking about with Brock Bowers. He had such a good year. And if not for this season that we have not really seen since Andrew Luck and RG3 of two rookie quarterbacks coming in at the same time and having a profound impact on their respective football teams, Brock Bowers would be a landslide winner for Rookie of the Year. But I think Pat Surtain should take home Defensive Player of the Year. If he loses, it's going to be to Trey Hendrickson, and it's going to be a pretty lazy vote, right? Because it'll just be, sacks. Most sacks. Take your thoughts. 719-247-1313. Out of Peyton, Nix, and Surtain, who do you think has the best chance? Who do you believe should win? And that doesn't have to be limited to one. I'll take your thoughts on that. Coming up next, Nuggets. If you haven't been paying attention because you've been locked in with what the Denver Broncos have been doing as of late, they're doing something that the Avalanche did about a month ago. That's next here on Extra Sports 1300. I kind of found it funny. The Jets hired Aaron Glenn to be their next head coach. And Sean Payton took to social media to congratulate him and say it was much deserved. So, would I be fair in saying that Sean Payton does not think that this Jets hire could be the worst hiring in the history of head coaching hirings? I get it. You know, Sean Payton, call him a lot of things. He's fair. He's fair. Trashes one Jets coach because he doesn't think he's any good. Celebrates another because he thinks he's very good. Now, Aaron Glenn is from his coaching tree. So it's not surprising that he would think that. But just the Jets of it all, I found somewhat humorous. The Denver Nuggets right now are kind of rolling, and it reminds me of what the Avalanche did about a month ago. Right? They had that 5-game road trip that they finished very well. And they started to rack up the wins. And I said going into January, the Avs have a real chance to jump up in the standings and to rack up a lot of wins. They did. And at the end of it, I said they look like a Stanley Cup contender. The Nuggets are going through their own stretch like that right now. Jamal Murray's been on a heater. Nikola Jokic has 4 games in a row that he hasn't even had to play in the fourth quarter and still has a triple-double. Like, the Nuggets are rolling right now, and they are looking as good as they have all season. And Nikola Jokic, after their win against Philadelphia, I thought had a lot of interesting things to say. A lot of people are grabbing onto him saying that he's playing the best basketball of his life, and I'll get to that in a second. I think the more consequential thing that he said to the TNT crew the other night was he talked about how this team has struggled against teams that are missing some of their players, as Philadelphia was the other night. You may have heard Joel Embiid did not play. Neither did Paul George. But he said that we've struggled with those kind of teams, and by beating Philly, especially the way they did, right? They blew them out. He characterized it as the Nuggets getting serious. They're getting serious now because how many games, Washington and some of these other games where you just look and you're like, my goodness, the Nuggets should be blowing this team out, and they don't. I think you see a team that's reflecting what Nikola Jokic said. They're getting serious. They're realizing, okay, we got to go here. Right? The Nuggets want to be one of the top seeds. They don't have to go for the number 1 seed. We're not doing that all over again. But they need to be one of the higher seeds. They need home court. It behooves them, I should say, to have home court through as much of the playoffs as they can. They don't need to run Jokic and Murray into the ground trying to catch Oklahoma City. But if they could continue down this road, playing the basketball that they're playing, and I think it's possible. Like, you don't have to sell out and play your stars every minute of every game in order to achieve this goal. If you get started earlier, like the Nuggets are starting to, if this is a sign of things to come, they'll have plenty of time to get up into the top 3, which I think is where they would like to be. And I certainly would think that the Nuggets' best path to getting to the NBA Finals would be to be on the opposite side of the bracket as Oklahoma City. Save that for the Western Conference Final. Whether they have home court advantage or not, let's have that be the Western Conference Final. Let's not be, if you're the Nuggets, you don't want to be a 5 seed, having to go on the road all the time, and your next team up after they probably, if the season ended today, would play the Lakers, and they would probably beat them because that's just the way it goes, but they wouldn't have home court, and then they'd immediately meet up with OKC. And maybe if this team continues the trend that they're on, who knows? Perception might change to the point that the Nuggets are the team to beat. But right now, it's unequivocally Oklahoma City. The Nuggets have been playing well, but part of them playing well and looking so good, and this is not different than the Avs. The Avs, to get to that point I was talking about, beat a lot of mediocre teams. But it was serving a dual purpose. It was moving them up in the standings so they didn't have so much work to do after the calendar turned to January, and for them to get right, to figure some stuff out. They went out and got the goaltenders and got some guys healthy, all that kind of stuff. It was to get right and also to move up the standings. The Nuggets, by beating undermanned Philadelphia at home, can't be proclaimed the favorite in the West. Okay, but they'll have their opportunities. Because much like the Avalanche, they have not fared great against other elite teams. They've lost to Boston. They've looked quite overmatched against Cleveland. They've lost to some of these better teams in the West as well. But you look at their schedule, tonight's a really interesting one, right? The one thing I'll say that's different between the Nuggets and the Avalanche is that the Nuggets don't quite have the schedule lined out so perfectly like the Avs did, right? They had their longest road trip of the season, which if they were able to win more than they lost, which they did, and look good on it, then you go, okay, that can be a springboard. And then they had a lot of mediocre teams. They said, okay, they can rack up the wins. And then it was all leading to this point where they would be matching up with other contenders. And they could see if they measured up. The Nuggets schedule isn't quite as clean as that. Certainly, they have started to move up the standings, racking up the wins against lesser teams. But their chances to kind of show how far they've come, and there's a lot of metrics to show that they have come a long way. The play of Jamal Murray being one. Their defense is now in the top half of the league, which they were deep in the 20s, and now they're in the top half of the league. So they'll get these intermittent chances to kind of see. Actually, probably two of them this week. You get Sacramento, the only team in the Western Conference that's hotter than the Denver Nuggets right now is Sacramento. Doug Christie has been a godsend for them. As much as the firing of Mike Brown was much, debated, and Michael Malone certainly had his thoughts, Sacramento's playing better. They're winning more. They've had multiple big comebacks from 10, 15 points down. So tonight is a chance for the Nuggets to kind of show off how different they are and how improved they are. And then they get Minnesota, and Minnesota is not, they're not looking great. Right? This whole Julius Randle thing isn't quite working out right now. Perhaps it's the burden of expectation. But Minnesota doesn't. As much consternation has been around the Denver Nuggets, they've been having a better season than Minnesota has. But still, that's one of those games that you want to see how the Nuggets fare. And then really, it's a lot of teams that they should be able to beat up on. And then you kind of fast forward a little bit and you see beginning of March, there's Boston again. So that's kind of what I am looking for the Denver Nuggets. Keep trending in this direction. Along the way, there will be games like tonight that I feel carry a little bit more weight, but we should see the Denver Nuggets continuing the way that they're playing, continuing the winning that they're doing. And then hopefully by the beginning of March, we get a real epic matchup between Denver and Boston, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll see if the perception around the Denver Nuggets changes. They certainly have not toppled Oklahoma City yet, but they're trending in that direction. Now, one thing that I think has helped recently with the Denver Nuggets is bringing Aaron Gordon off the bench. Now, the impetus of that is to work him back slowly from his injury, and they've been managing that calf off and on. He sat out some games, but he's coming off the bench. And it was interesting last night or the other night, Michael Malone talked about Aaron Gordon said that he would remain on the bench. And I heard Aaron Gordon, it come out of his own mouth that he's willing to come off the bench. And you want to talk about a guy that has already endeared himself to Nuggets fans, doing it even more to say, hey, I'm willing to come off the bench if it's what's best for the team. I mean, that's selfless. That's being Mr. Nugget. That's being the most important player that this team has outside of Nikola Jokic, the most indispensable. The type of player and the type of guy that Aaron Gordon is. It's a good thing they have him locked up for many years to come. And of course, it's what's best for the team, because essentially what you're seeing is them do what they do in the playoffs, where they make Aaron Gordon Nikola Jokic's backup. And the non-Nikola Jokic minutes have not been as big of an issue in the playoffs as they are the regular season, because they move Aaron Gordon to that spot. Now, they're still playing DeAndre Jordan, but Aaron Gordon being mixed into that group. And I suppose this is a credit to Russell Westbrook as well, that the level of play from the starting five has not really dropped off with Aaron Gordon coming off the bench because of Russell Westbrook. But there's no doubt this is what's best. If the Nuggets want to keep winning games and they want the non-Jokic minutes to not be as big of a problem, then they continue to bring Aaron Gordon off the bench. And as much as I believe Aaron Gordon in what he says, this can't remain the way the whole year. right? It can't. They're not going to bring him off the bench the rest of the year. Once he's fully healthy, he's going to be back in the starting lineup. I can't imagine Aaron Gordon remains on the bench the rest of this season. If not, we need to have if he does, we need to have a serious conversation about him being sixth man of the year. But Nuggets look really good right now. And the best news out of everything I just said is that Nikola Jokic hasn't played the fourth quarter the last few nights. Tonight, I think his services will be needed in the fourth quarter. Nuggets and Kings coming up tonight, 7 o'clock, right here on Extra Sports 1300. Take a break. More Drive Time Sports after this. Time to make your plans for the big game with Hooters of Colorado Springs. If you place your pre-order with Hooters, you can get 50 boneless wings for $79.99 or 50 bone-in wings for $89.99. And if you don't feel like entertaining this year, you can always go into Hooters of Colorado Springs on February 9th for a chance to win a custom engraved Hooters Colorado stove. Make Hooters a part of your big game plans. I'm thinking about creating a new segment on this show called Disrespect or Not Disrespect. Because I feel like so much right now, especially in football, is disrespect. Is it disrespectful? And it's always an easy place to go. And certainly you could feel someone is disrespected, a team is disrespected, and feel strongly about that. But it just seems like the last couple of days I've seen a lot of disrespect. Here's one. So this has general interest because we just did this the other day, the best rookie quarterback seasons ever. FanDuel decided to dabble, and they had Jaden Daniels at number one, and they had a lot of the same names that I had brought up during the show: Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, CJ Stroud. And then you go down, because they ranked the top 10, you go to 10. Right. And the great thing about these debates, it's so difficult to really, in many ways you're comparing eras. And I thought something interesting was that it didn't seem like anybody really before RG3 was on the list at all. Like, I didn't expand my list to 10, but I think there were some good rookie quarterback performances in a season before that. But RG3, Stroud, Dak, I had all those. I said statistically, my first takeaway from it was Dak Prescott's too low. The guy had a better statistical season than basically every one of those guys on that list. And while you can say that he had a better team around him, taking over a Cowboys team that went to the playoffs just 2 years prior, before Romo got hurt multiple times and things went poorly, there is quite a bit of pressure on somebody taking over as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Like, we can give Dak Prescott a little bit of credit for what he was in his rookie season, even if he was playing with Dez Bryant and some of Zeke. So I thought him being, I think he was 7th, was a little too low. And then I saw number 10. And it stuck out to me not only because you and I have intimate knowledge of how this quarterback season went, but also because I specifically mentioned a certain rookie quarterback and said he would be flirting with the top 10. Number 10 on their list was Caleb Williams. And I said the other day, Bo Nix would be flirting with the top 10 spot. Caleb Williams was not the guy that I thought would be placed above Bo Nix. That is an egregious error, because there is no world where Caleb Williams had a better rookie season than Bo Nix did. Like, you know me, I'm always trying to find common ground. What can we all agree on? Want to unite. I don't want to divide. Can we all agree that Bo Nix had a better rookie season than Caleb Williams did? His coach got fired. That's how bad it was. And you don't think Caleb Williams' performance was a big part of that? Now, I'm not out on Caleb Williams. I thought he had flashes. I didn't think that a lot of his struggles were on him. I think that the coaching staff of the Chicago Bears let him down in many ways. But it was a tumultuous season. It was a roller coaster ride. And did it turn out more good than bad? Perhaps. But it wasn't better than Bo Nix's rookie year. Like, if they would have put Bo Nix at 10, it would have been just about a perfect list. Because a lot of the names that were on there were the ones I brought up. But to put Caleb Williams over Bo Nix, come on now. I'm curious, and if Shea wins Rookie of the Year, if he wins MVP, I wonder whether the conversation will be about Nikola Jokic disrespect, because I don't think it will be. I think the way it is trending, either one of those two guys is incredibly deserving. Like, this is the thing, and it's going on in the NFL right now. You can only have one, and by picking one does not mean you are completely dismissing the other. Like, we should be so lucky most years in all of these sports that we have two players playing at an MVP level. I know it's so difficult for everybody to, comprehend, but it is possible for there to be two quality, deserving MVP candidates. Alas, there can only be one MVP. I don't look at anybody that says Shai Gilgeous-Alexander right now is the MVP and say they're disrespecting Jokic. That's got to be done, right? Like, I know the circumstances around Joel Embiid, and I said at the time, Joel Embiid had an MVP case. He was deserving. I thought Nikola Jokic was more deserving. I made a case for him, but Joel Embiid, I'm fine with Joel Embiid winning. But after the fact, I just found out that too many voters were voting against Nikola Jokic instead of for Joel Embiid, and that I was not okay with. If SGA wins MVP, I'm sorry, I don't think the disrespect card can be played. Dude dropped like 54 last night. Like, he's MVP. And it's the same thing with the NFL, like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson in a vacuum. Both MVP. Can only be one. Make your argument. But the argument for one doesn't mean you're putting down the other. But I wonder if that all comes to fruition, and even if SGA wins, the conversation is not, hey, Nikola Jokic is the most disrespected, whatever. I think Bo Nix may take up that mantle. Right? Because that people, as misguided as they might be, will say that Bo Nix got robbed of the Rookie of the Year. Which is not a sentence that's based in reality. Jaden Daniels is the Rookie of the Year. He just is, sorry. But there will be enough people thinking that Bo Nix is disrespected, and then you get these lists like these silly little lists where they put Caleb Williams above Bo Nix, which on the other side of the coin, the pro Bo Nix side, not based in reality. Caleb Williams was not better this year than Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix is going to take, because let's be real here, Colorado sports fans have a bit of a complex. I think in many ways it's well earned with what the Hall of Fame had done for a lot of years to Broncos players. Mike Shanahan's still not in the Hall of Fame. With some of the discourse surrounding Nikola Jokic, with where we are located on the map, what time zone we're in, what market size our teams are. Like, that chip is always going to exist. And it is the easiest thing for Colorado sports fans to do than to take up the mantle for a disrespected player that plays in Colorado. I think it's going to shift from Nikola Jokic to Bo Nix. Now, I don't think that's a particular hot take. You could see it coming, yes. When Jaden Daniels inevitably wins Rookie of the Year, there will be many people who will say that Bo Nix was more deserving. He had more touchdowns. And then they'll look at lists like this, where somebody at FanDuel thought that Caleb Williams had a better year than Bo Nix, which he absolutely did not. And then still to come this offseason, all the discourse around quarterback tiers and quarterback rankings, and I'm sure Bo Nix is going to fall short. I don't think the entire football world has fallen in head over heels in love with Bo Nix, as Broncos fans have. So I think Bo Nix, when these tier lists and rankings come out, I think Bo Nix is going to be lower than people around here would like. And there might be a good argument to say he should be higher. When they come out, we'll see. Here's one. Best rookie quarterback seasons, Caleb, to say nothing of the other 9 guys. Just the one right there at 10, Caleb Williams in the same draft class played the same season that Bo Nix did not have a better year. Bo Nix is going to take up the mantle that Nikola Jokic once had as the player that Colorado sports fans will rally around and will fight to the death anybody who doesn't see them through their eyes, how good they are. The most disrespected of all the athletes. It's going to be Bo Nix now. It's already starting. 719-247-1313. We'll get to the 3 stories that are driving the show shortly, but first, just want to let you know, not normal. It's not normal. The pain caused from chronic joint pain, you may, accept it because you've been dealing with it so long and you're like, well, it's normal to me. But it's not normal, especially when dealing with that pain you don't have to. And that's what QC Kinetics wants me to tell you. You don't have to live with it. Get moving again in 2025 with help from QC Kinetics. They are the nation's leader in regenerative medicine, or to put it another way, joint preservation. No steroids, no drugs, no surgery. Those don't treat the root cause of your chronic joint pain. QC Kinetics treatments do. It's the future of medicine, and tens of thousands of patients are living life again at the fullest. At the very least, you owe it to yourself to hear them out. Sit down with them for a free consultation. Let them tell you what it's all about, what benefits it can have. They'll evaluate your situation, make sure that they can help. And again, free consultation. Call QC Kinetics, 719-347-1988, 719-347-1988. Hello there. Welcome into a Thursday edition of Drive Time Sports with me. I'm Ryan. Good to meet you. Appreciate you stopping by, whether it's on your radio dial, online, or through the free Extra Sports 1300 app, sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health, and well-being for all. If you would like to chat, we can accommodate it. 719-247-1313 is both the text line and the phone line. Tonight, the Denver Nuggets take on the Sacramento Kings. Should be an interesting one. Both teams so hot right now. Nuggets 8-2 in their last 10. Sacramento 9-1. But that's tonight. That's in the future. Let's talk about the now. Here are the three stories that are driving the show. All right, story number one. A quick end to a long night for the Avalanche.
And here comes Pionk, a big drive, and he scores. What are the odds of that? Neil Pionk with his third goal ever versus the Avalanche is a slapper that goes high stick side on Mackenzie Blackwood. 17 seconds into overtime, and no one knows how to ruin a party like Neil Pionk.
Connor McGahey on the Altitude Radio Network. I wonder if the Pionk family would disagree. No, Neil is the life of the party. But the Avs finally, after more than 3.5 hours of trying to figure out the regular season version of Connor Hellebuyck, which is quite good and very much better than the playoff version of Connor Hellebuyck, they get not one but two goals and still lose in overtime. And the Avalanche right now are 4-8 against other Western Conference playoff teams. And if you were holding out hope that the Avs win the division, you got to beat Winnipeg outright, because now the Jets have the head-to-head tiebreaker as that season series has come to an end. Kind of early, if you ask me. So, and that's what I want to talk about. This stretch of games that the Avs, I think overall, and Cale Makar said it, this homestand, he didn't feel great about it. Wasn't terrible, but the Avs felt like they could have been better over this stretch of games where they were facing a lot of good teams. And that's what this stretch of games represented. They had beaten up on all of these mediocre teams, getting themselves right with Mackenzie Blackwood and everything, moving up the standings. Now they're within striking distance of everybody in that division. Everything's still in front of them. And then it was about measuring themselves against other really good teams, and they just haven't quite measured up. And last night was an example of that. Now, a common theme through these games is not having Valeri Nichushkin, which Jared Bednar says suffered a setback in his recovery from his lower body injury, and now they don't know when he's coming back. I think these two things are related, because in order for the Colorado Avalanche to look good against the league's best, and then to do it in the playoffs, they need Valeri Nichushkin. Whether he's hurt or whether he's absent for other reasons, you have seen his departure from the team has coincided with their exit from the playoffs. And that has been reaffirmed over this stretch of games when so much with the Avalanche is right? You can't pin it on the goaltending. They got Rantanen. They got the big three. They're out there every single game. The Avs have played better hockey. Still not quite enough. And if they don't have Valeri Nichushkin, forget about what I say about Casey Middlestat and how he's an X factor. It don't work without Nichushkin. They need the big three and Nichushkin. Maybe the core four is what they should be called, although Mackenzie Blackwood is quickly becoming an indispensable member of the Colorado Avalanche, and he was phenomenal last night. Again, they have to have Valeri Nichushkin. So whether he's out for another month, another 2 months, they're not getting the Stanley Cup final without him. And that has been made abundantly clear over the last few games, going against other Western Conference playoff teams. Story number 2, the finalists for each and every postseason award in the NFL are out. 3 Denver Broncos have a chance to win an award. Sean Payton for Coach of the Year, Bo Nix for Rookie of the Year, and Patrick Surtain for Defensive Player of the Year. The one that is most deserving is Surtain. Even with some time to think about it over the last couple of weeks, I still think Pat Surtain is the Defensive Player of the Year. He is exceptional at what he does. Same with the other nominees or other finalists, but Pat Surtain is head and shoulders above everyone that would be a peer of his. The Sauce Gardner, Pat Surtain, who's the best corner in the game debate has aged worse than who's the better big man, Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic. Pat Surtain is quite a bit better than everyone else at his position. And I think that is something that plays into these awards. Are you, by a decent margin, better than everyone else doing the same job as you? And you watch throughout the season teams' unwillingness to throw at him, which has always been a kind of a thing. But, the Raiders still threw it to Devontae Adams. Teams would still test Pat Surtain every now and again. They didn't this year. And when they did, his numbers were better than they have ever been. And you talk about the impact, the value he brings to this defense. The number of sacks that can be credited for coverage. How much he has been left on an island because Vance Joseph is blitzing the bejesus out of everybody they're playing. When you blend all the different criteria into these individual awards, I think Pat Surtain has the best case, certainly of all the Broncos nominated, to win his particular award. But I think he has the best argument to win that specific award. Now, Sean Payton, I could see probably second behind Kevin O'Connell. If for no other reason than the job that he did with Sam Darnold is more impressive to me than the job that Sean Payton did with Bo Nix. Now, there are other things like the Vikings in the best division in football having the record that they did. Sean Payton has a good case. It's not better than Kevin O'Connell's case. And Bo Nix wasn't the best rookie at his own position this year. So this is not about Bo Nix versus Brock Bowers. There's an apples to apples comparison between him and Jaden Daniels is more deserving. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Surtain win and Nix and Peyton finish second. That's probably where I would put them. I wouldn't be shocked either to see Brock Bowers potentially above Bo Nix, playing into my earlier theory that Bo Nix is going to take up the mantle from Nikola Jokic as the most disrespected Colorado athlete. That will rub people the wrong way around here. I promise you that if Brock Bowers finishes second. In the end, it only matters if you win. And I don't think Sean Payton and Bo Nix will win. I don't think they deserve to win their specific awards. Patrick Surtain does. And we'll see what? 2 weeks from today? Whether he indeed will win Defensive Player of the Year. Now, from someone who should win Defensive Player of the Year to someone who maybe in the near future can win Defensive Player of the Year, Tennessee Titans general manager, used to work with the Kansas City Chiefs, said in his introductory press conference that the Titans will not pass on a generational talent with the top pick in the draft. When I hear that, I think of one guy, and that's Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter is the one, and this guy just got on the job. Yeah, he's probably doing some draft work for the Chiefs before he took the Titans job, but perhaps he finds another generational talent. But as far as I'm looking at it, there's one generational talent in this draft. Abdul Carter is outstanding. Tyler Warren is fantastic. Ashton Genty, awesome. Travis Hunter's the generational talent in this draft. He's the generational talent that would deserve to go number one. Of course, the one caveat is always, do you need a quarterback? Which I think is the more significant thing to come out of those comments. It's an interesting conversation to have, how many potentially generational talents are in this draft and why there's only one, and it's Travis Hunter. But this is the Tennessee Titans signaling two things. One, they're not going to necessarily take a quarterback. And two, if you want a quarterback and there's only really two that you can honestly project to be franchise quarterbacks, find out what the phone number is to the Tennessee Titans office. Because I think that was his intent more than anything else. Now, there would be no big issue with him telegraphing what they're going to do. No one can jump over him. So if he wanted to say yesterday that we're drafting Travis Hunter, nothing anybody could do to stop them. Roger Goodell would be upset because his television product has been diminished. But he could come out and say that. But I think more what he was signaling was the Titans are open for business. And I think maybe it's semantics, but I think trading down is not necessarily passing on a generational talent. Because they could move down, I don't know, 2 spots, a spot, and still end up with Travis Hunter. I don't know how Titans fans feel about this draft. I haven't heard a lot from Titans fans. I got to think they would be good with a Chicago Bears type haul for the number 1 overall pick, and they still end up with Travis Hunter. But I think the Titans are signaling that they are open for business. If you want a quarterback, because that's the thing. We could argue Abdul Carter is a generational talent. We could talk about Ashton Genty being a generational talent. We can even talk about Tyler Warren being a generational talent. But 2 guys that should not enter that conversation, as much as I like both of them, are Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. They can both be franchise guys. They can both be very good quarterbacks. Neither is a generational talent. So if you want one of those 2 guys, just know that the Titans may not be looking QB. So maybe you want to pick up the phone and try to get up to number 1 if you thought before, oh, well, the Titans are going to take a quarterback. And if Travis Hunter goes number 1 to Tennessee, then this draft is going to be interesting because you have some teams after him that don't really need quarterbacks, or you could see maybe not going quarterback either. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the 3 stories that are driving the show. Ben Johnson announced his arrival in Chicago with authority. Talk about that next here on Extra Sports 1300. So, breaking news out of the NFL within the last hour that Buccaneers offensive coordinator Liam Cohen is now back in the mix for the Jacksonville Jaguars to be their next head coach. This, of course, coming on the heels of Shad Khan firing GM Trent Baalke. And literally, that's the report. Cohen wasn't interested, and now he is because Baalke is fired. If only everyone would have been saying that from the beginning, that Baalke is as big of a problem in Jacksonville as anybody. Wait, everybody did say that. So perhaps Liam Cohen will be the next head coach of the Jaguars, and then we'll turn our attention to see if Jerry Jones can somehow find a way to entice Brian Schottenheimer to be his head coach. And I talked about this earlier. The competency gap in the NFL is wider than it is in any sport. There are just way too many bad organizations led by bad owners. And the number one criteria for being a bad owner is meddling. And that's what Shad Khan is doing. That's what he does. And then he makes terrible decisions. So Ben Johnson made some headlines, certainly, with his press conference, didn't he? Saying that he enjoyed beating Matt LaFleur twice. That was the big takeaway from that. I think Ben Johnson is going to work in Chicago. I think he'll be good for Caleb Williams. He can craft an offense for Caleb just like he crafted it for Jared Goff. And you saw those results. I think it will work. But what he took head on yesterday that is needed in Chicago as much as a quarterback whisperer, they need a culture change. Right? And he came from the perfect place. There is no culture west of Washington, D.C. that has been more radically changed than Detroit. Ben Johnson learned from the best. When you think of culture, you think of Dan Campbell. Everything about him. And so what Ben Johnson did yesterday when he met with the Chicago media was basically what Dan Campbell did when he took over the Lions. We're done being the cellar dwellers. We're done getting pushed around. We're done getting bullied. The Chicago Bears are, by definition, a losing organization. Ben Johnson had to go in yesterday and say that changes now under my watch. And what can you do in a press conference? You're not going to be able to show what you can do with Caleb Williams. You take a shot at your biggest rival. In a division where rivalries mean as much as they do in any division in football. Now, could we say it was a bit much? Was there another way that Ben Johnson could have given out the same message without taking a shot and rubbing Matt LaFleur's nose in the fact that Detroit had beaten them twice a year? Probably. The tact might have been off. But if there's any fan base that can kind of appreciate Ben Johnson breaking head coach bro code, should be Broncos fans. Sean Payton does this all the time. Sean Payton says things that everybody looks at and goes, whoa. Right? What he said about Nathaniel Hackett. What he just said the other day about feeling confident about their next game had they gotten past the Buffalo Bills. Those things are a bit out of pocket. Those things are a bit unlike other head coaches. But it's all a part of Sean Payton building up the culture of the Denver Broncos. Because they've gotten pushed around over the years, especially by the team in Kansas City. So what better way to further signal the culture change in Denver than by taking a shot and implying strongly that the Denver Broncos would have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs? And Ben Johnson's trying to do the same thing in Chicago. Now, the risk reward, right? Dan Campbell, still there are some detractors, but overall he is admired. Sean Payton right now, living good in Denver. He's being looked at as a savior of the franchise. But the risk is, just like what Sean Payton found out, well, and Dan Campbell did too. With Sean Payton, it was the comments about Nathaniel Hackett that backfired on him because the Jets beat the Denver Broncos that year. And with Dan Campbell, when the Detroit Lions still weren't winning yet, it was the biting kneecaps thing. Played on endless loop. Look at this giant buffoon that's talking about biting kneecaps, and the Detroit Lions are still only winning 4 games a year. Look at Sean Payton sipping on a latte and saying that Nathaniel Hackett did the worst head coaching job in the history of head coaching jobs and then turning around and losing to him. They look like idiots. But over time, it worked. And now Dan Campbell is a savior in Detroit. Sean Payton, same thing in Denver. Ben Johnson can be that. But I promise you, say this, whether it works out long-term or not, we'll see. But in the short term, you watch the Packers beat them by 3 touchdowns, and you look at social media. When you put yourself out there like that, when you make bold proclamations, when you take shots, taking over a losing team, it gets worse before it gets better. And Ben Johnson will be mocked. He'll be memed. And there will be some segment of Bears fans who will want the guy run out of town in year 1. Not even through year 1. Like whenever the Packers come up on the schedule and they lose by 3 touchdowns, they're going to want to run him out of town. It gets worse before it gets better. But Ben Johnson learned side by side with Dan Campbell what it's like to build a culture. And one of the things you have to do when you're taking over such a bad culture, you got to kick the door down. Can't just open it up and stick your head in and say, I'm happy to be here. We're going to play. No, you got to kick it down and be like, all that other nonsense that happened before I got here, it's done. So, like Sean Payton, the tact probably wasn't quite there from Ben Johnson, but I get what he was doing. And I promise you they are eating it up in Chicago. They love that he said that. see what Aaron Glenn has in store for his Jets press conference, because he could very well do the same thing. Why not, right? Although Ben Johnson did it first, so maybe Aaron Glenn maybe needs to take a different way going about it, but it would work for the Jets too. 719-24-7. 13-13, one last break. We'll come back, wrap it up. Don't forget, big one tonight in the NBA, Nuggets Kings at 7 o'clock here on Extra Sports 1300. Ben Johnson announcing his presence with authority in Chicago yesterday. This text coming in at 719-247-1313. The best thing I think Johnson did in his press conference was he looked right at the players and said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that, but I think they both go to the same thing. Right? I mean, maybe if you're a little bit less petty of a Bears fan, you care more about that than the shots at Matt LaFleur. But they're both the same thing. And he did other things too in this press conference. It just, even a little thing like saying he's going to craft the offense around Caleb Williams, like that just was not the case in Chicago this year. But that part of it, him telling the players, get ready to be comfortable being uncomfortable, that's culture. Right? That's the first thing. Got to establish a culture. And Sean Payton did that in Denver. Dan Campbell did that in Detroit. Dan Quinn's doing that in Washington. Got to lay that groundwork first. Once in a while, you'll be gifted somebody like Jaden Daniels and help accelerate that process. Sometimes you got to wait a year like Sean Payton until you can jettison Russell Wilson, and then you find your guy. But it's about establishing the culture and changing the culture. And then the winning kind of does the rest of the work for you, right? You start winning, that changes the culture as well. So Russell Wilson, he may be gone from Colorado, but he's never gone in our minds, is he? He went on the Pat McAfee show and he talked about the coaches that he has had in his career. Oh, actually, I should say, not all his coaches. I've been fortunate to play for two really special coaches in terms of men and how they think and how they process the game. Obviously, in Coach Pete Carroll and Coach Mike Tomlin are really unique individuals in how they lead and motivate. I think they're culture builders. Funny that he would say that at the end, the culture builder thing, because I just got done talking about Sean Payton being a culture builder. This is not, yes, it was an intentional omission of Sean Payton. 100%. Mr. Unlimited was limited in his mention of his coaches on purpose. He was omitting Sean Payton. By the way, also Nathaniel Hackett. But yet no one's keying on that. Where's the people outraged that Russell Wilson did not include Nathaniel Hackett with the likes of Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin? Nobody stands up for Nathaniel Hackett, do they? But everyone's all up in arms about him omitting Sean Payton. This can't be a one-way street. You have to be fair to the situation. It was like 2 days ago where Sean Payton stood at the podium and was talking about how miserable last season was. You don't think that was directed at Russell Wilson? You don't think that was about him? It was. So why turnabout is fair play. Okay, Sean Payton says coaching Russell Wilson was miserable. And Russell Wilson is allowed to say playing for Sean Payton was miserable. Now, he's not going to say that because he has a little bit better bedside manner than Sean Payton does, but he's insinuating the same thing. He's saying, you know what? Right back at you, buddy. I hated playing for you. I don't think that you're in the class of Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin. So it's fair. What Sean Payton said, I don't see any lies. I think he was miserable. I think you, as a Broncos fan, were miserable watching that football team for large stretches of that season. And I don't think, to be fair, that Russell Wilson would equate being threatened with benching if he did not adjust his contract to make it easier for the Broncos to get rid of him as really culture building. Right? If Sean Payton is being fair, then so is Russell Wilson. If we're giving both men their opinions and allowing their opinions to be true to them, that's only fair. And that's what I think is intentionally removed from the annals of history. Nobody brings up in this conversation how Sean Payton went about getting rid of Russell Wilson. Because that was the entire thing. To say, oh, everyone thought that Sean Payton was such an evil guy because he cut Russell Wilson. No, it was not that. It wasn't that he cut Russell Wilson. It was that he went to him, or he had George Payton go to him and say, you need to push this injury guarantee into the future, or we will bench you. Nobody brings that up. They just think simply cutting Russell Wilson was evil. Nobody is saying that. Who's saying that cutting Russell Wilson is doing him wrong? Who in their right mind could watch Russell Wilson last year play for the Denver Broncos and say that merely being cut is being wronged? It's not that. It's how he went about it. He threatened him with benching and then benched him and then cut him. It was the way he went about it. And you have to look at that situation and say he didn't handle it properly. The end result was what you wanted. The end result was necessary. But did he have to do that? Especially now in retrospect, you look back on it and you're like, what were the Broncos even trying to get him to waive his injury guarantee anyway? They were able to go to the playoffs with the biggest dead cap hit in the history of the NFL. Why was Sean Payton doing that? He didn't need him to do that. Look how it turned out. In Russell Wilson's eyes, I can understand why he would not put Sean Payton in the same breath as Mike Tomlin and Pete Carroll. And I can understand the pettiness. I can understand if he truly believes it. I can also understand if he doesn't necessarily believe it. He just hates the guy, or he doesn't believe it and he just wants to clap back at Sean Payton for what he said the other day. I allow Russell Wilson to do all of that as fair game. But Sean Payton did take a Saints organization that was as disastrous as any in pro sports and got them to win a Super Bowl. He took over a Broncos franchise that was rudderless, and he gave them direction. Sean Payton builds a culture. He is a culture builder. So it's okay that Russell Wilson feels the way he does about Sean Payton. He has every right to. And in many ways, he deserves to feel that way because of how he was treated by Sean Payton and that organization towards the end. But if he were to take it one step further, or Pat McAfee would have followed up and asked, what about Sean Payton? And he would said, no, not a culture builder. I would have to disagree with him because Sean Payton is. He did it in one place and he's starting to do it in the other. Now, you may not like the culture, right? Russell Wilson, more of a positive, optimistic, glass half full type guy, kumbaya, everybody love everybody. Sean Payton's culture is a little scorched earth at times. It's a little messy. He can be mean, but he does create a culture. He did in New Orleans and he's doing it in Denver. But the biggest thing here is to scoff at what Russell Wilson did. You can't blame him. You can't. The way he treated him was wrong. It was wrong to threaten to bench him because if he did not fix something in his contract. That's not the way this works. He has every reason to hold Sean Payton in the lowest regard possible. But I get it. It's a one-sided thing. You know, Sean Payton, every mean thing that he says about Russell Wilson or about Nathaniel Hackett or anybody is okay. And we forget the circumstances around Russell Wilson's departure from the Denver Broncos. But on the other side, we think Russell Wilson should be pointing out Sean Payton and thanking him. Thank you. Thank you for threatening to bench me. You are a culture builder just like Mike Tomlin and Pete Carroll. I love you, Sean Payton. Like, what the hell do you expect him to say? It's fair. It's all fair. It's all good. They're entitled to their opinions. They have a lot of reasons to feel the way that they do. But if we're going to have a discussion about whether Sean Payton is a culture builder like Mike Tomlin and like Pete Carroll, he doesn't build culture like those guys, but he is a culture builder. You're seeing it in his second spot now. Coming up tonight, don't forget, Nuggets, Kings. Be a good one. Probably lead the show with that unless it's a big-time snooze fest. And then most of tomorrow will be about conference championship Sunday. Bills, Chiefs, Commanders, Eagles. Your thoughts, my thoughts, your predictions, my predictions. Until then, enjoy your evening. Up next, JR Sport Brief, only for a little bit. And then it'll be Nuggets Kings here on Extra Sports 1300.